We turn now to our political panel for some analysis. Lanhee Chen is a policy expert and fellow at the Hoover Institution. Rachael Bade covers Congress for the Washington Post. Jamelle Bouie is a CBS News political analyst and a columnist with the New York Times. And Paula Reid is a White House correspondent here at CBS. Good to have all of you here. You heard healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. That's the main issue for all voters. That is not what anyone is talking about this week, Lanhee. We are talking about what the president continued to tweet about this morning. Racism, the squad, and that dispute. Why is the president continuing it?
Well, I mean, I think he feels it's part of an electoral strategy. And I think that the Trumpification of the Republican Party is complete. And I think you're seeing that in terms of the degree to which he's able to consolidate Republican support and how few Republicans really came out this week and took issue with the president's remarks. And I think that demonstrates the degree to which he does consolidate that base. And going forward, the question for the president is, how does he continue to drive up that support amongst his base and potentially expand his base not to independent voters, not to suburban women, but to the kinds of people who would sort of enjoy the appeal, this sort of blatant appeal to race that the president's engaging in. And it's all about the 2020 election, and it's all about expanding and consolidating that base.
So race is front and center in 2020, Jamelle. And the Democratic candidates on the last debate stage made it racial politics front and center as well in the attacks on Joe Biden and his record. Is it dangerous to use this as a political tool?
I think it's important to distinguish between what we saw on the Democratic stage and what the president's doing. I think what we saw on the Democratic stage was an attempt among Democrats to sort of reckon with the legacy of their party's history, Joe Biden's history specifically, but largely an attempt to win back certain voters by white suburbanites, non-college white workers, by triangulating on issues like desegregation, on crime, on welfare, and trying to move away from that as the party becomes more diverse, as the party relies even more on African Americans and Latinos and Asian Americans, versus what the president was doing is trying to summon up the same kind of fervent energies from the 2016 campaign to drive up support among his base. I think it's important to say that those kind of remarks are very unpopular with the public at large. The president saw his approval drop to not an all-time low, but close to it after Charlottesville. The remarks about football players kneeling were not popular. The Virginia gubernatorial election was practically a lifetime ago in 2017. But the Republican candidate, Ed Gillespie, suffered at the polls for leaning into those kinds of attacks. So while the president may believe it's effective, the actual evidence on display is that it's probably not that effective for him.
But it energizes people, Rachael, right? I mean, it energizes the parties. And yet you did see some Republicans, as you say, Lanhee, not very vocally, but indicate they weren't totally comfortable with this place.
Put Trump aside for a second. You look at your traditional congressional Republicans. I mean, Liz Cheney in your interview, she might not have wanted to admit it and chose to sort of blame the media, but they really have a problem here, and they have been talking about it privately. It is one thing, and Republicans all agreed, and Democrats would say they did have a strategy here to single out these four women and talk about their policies and the fact that they support socialism or socialistic agendas of some sort. Independent voters don't like that, and Republicans could really use that to their advantage. But what Trump did this week is he totally upended this strategy by making it about race, by sending those racist tweets, the chant that followed, send her back. That Republicans, they knew that changed everything. And while they didn't come out publicly and say, Trump, you can't tweet like this, they confronted Mike Pence in a private meeting just a few days ago. Liz Cheney was in the room for that, where they said, you need to tell the president this is not good for us and this is going to hurt us. And so Pence relayed that to the president, and that's why he tried to put some space between himself and that chant that broke out at the rally, send her back, send her back. But we know the president. We know that sort of he returns to his gut instinct, even when people try to pull him back from what he wants to do. So, the question is, how long is he going to try to separate himself from that? And, will he do this again?
Well, this morning, the president's tweet was, these individuals are incapable of loving this country. Paula, how is the White House handling this?
Well, I don't think anyone here really has a true incentive to tamp this down because both sides are getting the foil that they want ahead of 2020. Now, of course, there are some Republicans, particularly those in vulnerable districts, who do not want to be on the defensive, who do not want to be in a position to tamp this down. But even when the president backed off, and our reporting also reflects that the vice president, some of his family members went to him and asked him to distance himself from this, even when he backed off, what did he do by doing that? He kept this in the news cycle. He kept a squad v. Trump in the news cycle, in the dialogue. So to your point, it doesn't appear that the White House in the long term will likely change this strategy. I don't expect to see the president actually tell any of his crowds to knock it off with the chanting.
Jamelle, I want to ask you about some of the language, the so-called squad, these four freshman House Democrats. Normally, someone who's very new to Washington like this wouldn't get so much attention from the most powerful man in this city. But the words and that they have used. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez referring to Border Patrol detention centers as concentration camps. Republicans have said that is disrespectful to Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Ayanna Pressley, the congresswoman from Massachusetts, she is being called a racist because she said when speaking about elected representatives, we don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. We don't need black faces that don't want to be a black voice. What is happening here? Republicans are calling that racist, and from Anthony Salvanto's polling, people are only hearing this on through a political filter and digesting it that way.
I mean, I think.
But do Democrats really have a problem?
So as far as how voters are hearing it, I think part of the larger issue here is that politics are so partisan and so divided along partisan lines that it's difficult to for a lot of people to understand things in any sort of context other than the immediate partisan battle. And so in that sense, if, say, Representative Pressley's remarks get traction, it may be a problem because no one's going to try to hear it in the context that I hear it, which is sort of, there's an old proverb that's attributed to Zora Neale Hurston, not all skin folk are kinfolk, which is the idea that not everyone who looks like you necessarily has your interest in mind. This is a very common thing, very common sentiment within black communities, and that's sort of what I hear from Pressley, and it doesn't strike my ears in a racist way. But in terms of the broader political context that's going to pop up and what's going to happen and what is happening is sort of, oh, well, she's talking about race. She's talking about what people ought to believe, which that's obviously racist. Why is she not being criticized like Donald Trump when there are very different, very broad contexts for what's happening from both figures, and that's hard to communicate within the very narrow world of partisan politics.
So this is another reason why Republicans were really frustrated when Trump tweeted last week, because if you let the Democrats sort of have their infighting, Republicans on the Hill had loved that. You mentioned this Pressley quote specifically. I guarantee that would have dominated coverage on Capitol Hill for at least a week with Congressional Black Caucus members who were really upset by that quote. But Trump, instead, his tweet united the Democratic Party, and this infighting that we have seen sort of spill out on Capitol Hill and really create a problem for Speaker Nancy Pelosi, that was all put in the background. But the Democrats do have an issue in that, these four really are defining what people are reading in the news around the country. And Pelosi wants to keep the focus on health care. She doesn't want to talk about Medicare for all. She doesn't want to talk about socialism. That's not good for Democrats. But again, Trump totally changed the narrative.
I think that's the fundamental problem, is that Democrats have a little bit of this power vacuum that comes when you have a party that's out of power from the White House. And the question becomes a definitional one, which is who speaks for the Democratic Party? Well, the answer right now is the squad. It is not Nancy Pelosi, who is doing her best to hold together a disparate caucus. It is not, interestingly enough, the presidential candidates. You would think in a presidential cycle it would be one of those candidates. They're doing their thing. But the polling reflects that the messaging and the policy dialogue is being dominated by these four people who are vastly unrepresentative of the kinds of voters Democrats need to win if they want to win this presidential election. So they have a real problem, in my mind, in this disconnect between who's speaking for the Democratic Party now and how Americans see Democrats and what they need to be to win that next presidential election.
We're going to take a break here. Congress is about to go on summer break, so I want to talk about what they actually might get done. On the other side of this, we'll be back in a few moments. We're back now with our political panel. This week in Washington, it maybe must-see TV, or maybe America forgot about that 2-year-long investigation, Paula Reid, led by the special counsel, Robert Mueller, into Russian election meddling in 2016. He will be forced in many ways to answer questions. This isn't an appearance he wanted to make. What do Democrats actually think they're going to hear from him, and what is he prepared to say?
It was so interesting to hear Schiff saying he wants him to bring the Mueller report to life. I'm not sure what that equates to, the audio version of the Mueller report, but anyone who thinks that this is going to sizzle or be entertaining or really reveal new things about this investigation, sadly mistaken. As you said, this is a reluctant witness. Special counsel Robert Mueller is just not that into us, the media. He only engaged in about 2 instances in the entire course of his investigation, and he made it clear in his prepared remarks. He said, I hope this is the last time I have to talk about this. So in the course of the several hours where he will be answering questions, he is likely to stick to his report, to not want to go beyond the confines of that report. One area, though, I think where Democrats could potentially make some progress is on Attorney General William Barr, to clarify the discrepancy between the former special counsel and the Attorney General, because that's not in the report itself. That all happened after. Barr testified he wasn't sure if Mueller agreed with his conclusions, but Mueller sent him a letter. He called him. So I do think there is the opportunity to maybe undermine the credibility of the Attorney General, but Republicans also have a huge opportunity here to address the origins of this investigation. They don't even need Mueller to say anything. Just rereading those text messages between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok undermines the credibility of not only this investigation, but also the Clinton email one.
From the FBI.
Yes.
To refresh people's memories. Rachael, Jerry Nadler was on television, the House Judiciary Chairman, saying that there is clear evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors, and talking about what he expects from Mueller. Those are clear words as to what he has in mind. Is this all about laying groundwork for impeachment?
For some Democrats, absolutely. And that's where there's actually a division going into this hearing about what do Democrats actually want to get out of this. I mean, the leadership, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who is against the idea of impeaching the president, they are hoping that Mueller comes in and sort of lays out some of these instances of potential obstruction of justice, and that people see that. It hurts Trump's poll numbers. And, you know, only about 3% of Americans actually read the report. So she's hoping that people learn, and this hurts Trump in 2020. Now, people like Jerry Nadler, who he hasn't come out publicly for impeachment, but privately he has been pushing the leadership to start, and about 90 other Democrats in the House who have called for impeachment to begin. They want this to be sort of a watershed moment to see the number of Democrats who support impeachment actually grow, and potentially even independents who are on the fence on this to come around to their side of thinking. Now, there's a lot of skepticism that that is going to happen, but the fact that Jerry Nadler is going on TV and saying that he is thinking Mueller's going to lay out high crimes and misdemeanors shows that Nadler is getting closer to that point, even as the Democratic leadership is not.
Could this backfire, Jamelle?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's that clear. We're kind of in uncharted territory here. We haven't had, the last impeachment controversy trial in the 90s was happening in a very different political context, with a much more popular president, a growing economy that the president was getting credit for. And so then impeachment did hurt the opposition party. But here, the president is manifestly unpopular. What he's accused of, I think there is a appetite on some Republicans in the public willing to say that the president has violated norms and standards here. And it's entirely possible that pursuing impeachment in this particular instance could end up worsening Trump's position versus backfiring against Democrats. But again, I think it's difficult to say because this is a unique situation. There aren't very many guides in the past for understanding what is going to happen going forward.
And Lanhee, this is one of the last things that happens before Congress goes on summer vacation. Policy-wise, anything in the future?
Well, we have the debt ceiling, and again, this is sort of like the Washington, let's go up to the cliff every couple of years because we can't stand stability. Let's figure out a way to compromise economic growth, and let's figure out a way to compromise everything that potentially is going right with the economy. So they're going to have to figure out the debt ceiling. Some are saying it's going to be in the context of a larger budget deal. Now, that budget deal potentially, I think, exposes fractures on the Republican side, right? Because you have some fiscal conservatives like the current White House Chief of Staff who believe that that fiscal responsibility element is extremely important. Some even suggest the president's there too, that he might want to go there in a second term. And then you've got a lot of Republicans who say, forget fiscal responsibility. It's not popular. Nobody cares about it anymore, so why worry about it? So those divisions, I think, are going to be very real. And clearly, it's to the benefit of the president to keep this situation put off until after the election. So there is huge incentive to get a deal done.
All right. Thanks to all of you. We will be right back.